How do you climb by yourself safely? You're in luck. I am not going to film this solo.
My name is Brent. I'm known for rope solo climbing. I do a lot of lead rope solo climbing, a lot of top rope solo climbing, and I even run Avant Climbing, which makes gear for rope solo climbing.
I thought it made sense to talk about soloing with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Just like you should go climbing with somebody who knows what they're doing before you go and try to solo after watching two guys on the internet you don't know show you how to do it.
It's always best to solo with a friend.
It is, until you get good at it and then you can go out on your own. The phrase rope soloing is somewhat obvious, but can you explain what it is and why somebody would do it?
Sure. So if you're rope soloing, you are self-belaying, and that might mean an ascension device on a fixed rope, effectively creating a top rope, or that might be lead rope soloing, where the device is on you, but you're still climbing above your protection and still facing a long fall.
And you're belaying yourself.
And you're belaying yourself. That's the premise, but those are lumped together, and today we're talking about the benign version, top rope soloing on a fixed line, which is really where you should start.
You don't have to free solo, climb without a rope, which is dangerous, in order to get the benefits of the autonomy of being up on a rock by yourself. What are the other benefits?
Yeah, freedom of movement. You're able to move as fast as you want. You're not waiting for a belayer to pull in a rope. You're not waiting on a belayer to coordinate schedules.
You sound like you like climbing during the week a lot.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't work during the week and you want to go climbing midweek, it's great. If you want to perfect a move on a project and literally spend an hour trying every possible foothold, it's great for that.
Yeah, that is hard to get somebody to want to belay for that.
I like to call it practice climbing. It's all the purity of free solo climbing with none of the consequence.
My buddy Evan down there is belaying, not me. And so I'm still able to climb even though we're a party of three. And I am finding that the CT rolling line is super good enough. I actually like it, still backed up with this. This is great. So it makes sense that I'd want to do this before I try lead rope soloing. It makes sense that this is probably safer than lead rope soloing. Is there ways to be redundant and safe about this, or are there like inherent risks like lead rope soloing where you're using your gear way out of spec?
Top rope soloing is actually way more controlled, and even the manufacturers, such as Petzl and their microtraction, have put out explicit information allowing their devices to be used for top rope soloing. So this is actually less COA, less L for liability.
Yeah, the other video is just a bunch of this all over it. So big picture is you're taking two rope grabs of sorts and you're dragging them up as you climb, and if you fall, they grab. Exactly. And it could be on one rope or two.
Exactly.
Video's over. Thanks for watching.
The premise is simple. The rope is fixed to the wall from the top, and you're just climbing with progress capturing devices, rope grabs.
So you're not managing your rope unless the weight of the rope isn't auto-feeding or something.
Exactly. There's really easy ways to make it auto-feeding, so all you're focusing is on the climbing itself.
Now, a couple questions before we get started. How do I get my rope to the top? Because everything I climb, something has to get me up there.
Yep. So top rope soloing is especially applicable if you're lucky enough to have top access crags. Whether this is a route that you can walk down afterwards, it means you could walk up before, or if you access the cliff from the top anyways, it's really easy to throw the rope down and just go climbing.
And that is where you live, is that the haven of this?
Northern Arizona is a mecca for top rope soloing, and I'm lucky enough to go practice climbing alone all the time.
So before we get in the weeds of what if the route zigzags and what if it's going over an edge and do the devices play well with each other, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Do we have any other disclaimers to avoid the big L?
Maybe it's not device misuse, but there's still risks hidden to pay attention to.
I think that's in climbing in general.
Yeah.
You can't just willy-nilly go out there. This is why I think it's important to go with somebody who knows what they're doing and top rope solo while you're with someone, and then maybe lead rope solo while you're with somebody before you're just by yourself and learn something the hard way. That's enough disclaimers.
Yeah.
Let's get started.
Sounds great. This is the basics of top rope soloing. You have a basic anchor fixing your rope to the top of the cliff, and you have a variety of ascender options, but you are going to connect redundant rope grabs that ascend up the rope to your harness, and you'll be able to move up, but if you fall, you don't hit the ground.
So before we get into the devices, is there anything special about the anchor up here other than just building a redundant, equalized standard anchor that you learned when you rock climbed with your friend?
You do want to control abrasion resistance, rubbing over edges, rubbing over bulges. If you had an anchor over the lip of the rock and you need to rappel in to get to the anchor, we'll go into refixing into transitions. That is how you manage abrasion and risks. But best case, you have a really simple anchor you can walk to around the cliff, and you set up your favorite redundant anchor and fix the tail of the rope at the top.
Do you have a specific diameter of rope that you prefer? Like in the lead rope solo video, you like skinny.
I don't think it matters as much. You definitely need to control for abrasion more if you're using an 8.5 dynamic rope than a 10 millimeter static rope, but you still can top rope solo on a skinny rope if you're refixing on the way down and isolating the clean chunks of rope that aren't stretching and sawing. That's the risk we're trying to mitigate.
So it's okay to use a skinnier rope, but there's not a huge benefit? Because in lead rope soloing, there's a benefit that we go into.
Yeah, the benefit of the skinny rope is not you would go top rope soloing on your own with a skinny rope, but there's more advanced techniques where you might follow somebody else's lead using top rope soloing devices, and that's where they might have used a skinny rope and you can manage it and make it work. That's maybe a little too deep in the weeds.
It's deep in the weeds because you can't manage it if they led.
You
Yeah.
don't fall. Static versus dynamic ropes is all about controlling the risk of abrasion and refixing on your way down so that you're not bouncing and sawing 60 meters of rope.
It's not going to shock load you too hard if you have a static rope?
No, you're not going to shock load if you have a bungee to hold your device up so that you're only falling mere inches.
So a dynamic rope or even a semi-static rope is going to be bouncing up and down while you are projecting or falling over and over and over. And so you want to make sure that if there is a rock edge, that it's not rubbing the same spot over and over and over. If you are climbing with a partner, the rope is typically not touching the same spot all the time. And so we're going to have Brent show us how he mitigates that, because what you could do is you could refix this at a new spot below. You could even put your own gear in or something. And if this is over an edge far back, a tree 30 feet away, so you can safely approach the edge, this is fine, but you don't want this to be rubbing on your rock edge. And then you're top roping up to here. But once you get up to here, now you have a knot. So he's going to show you a trick.
So now if we are to consider edge abrasion risks down the pitch where we don't have a stance to use two hands, we don't want to stop, use our personal anchor, go into the piece of gear, stop our flow in climbing, there is a trick to do it in a one-hand releasable refixed manner. And what that looks like, while rappelling down, I'm going to clip into that piece of protection that I'm refixing off of, just below my abrasion point. And you'll notice I'm just clipping in for a momentary weight hold. I'm not necessarily clipping in for an anchor. I'm still on belay. I take a bit of slack. I clip through the protection point. And down here with quite a bit of slack below the piece, I'll make a full twist. Pull it up to just below the carabiner. Pull a bite of the top rope through. Cinch it. And then weight my rappel device.
And you have very little slack here.
And I don't have too much slack here, so the system is still redundant. If this were to come loose while I'm climbing, I fall an extra 2 feet. I do fall over this edge, but one time over the edge is fine. It's the bouncing we're trying to avoid. And then I'll do my transition of weighting my rappel device before undoing my personal anchor. But I keep rappelling. So I will do this sometimes multiple places down a pitch, and I don't personally bring rope protection for top rope soloing. I just err on the side of refixing often. The downside of rope protection, which is often like a rubber fire hose that's velcroed onto the rope and protecting the sheath, is that when you're top roping up, it's a roadblock. You have to stop and pull it off with two hands. So I think it's often more efficient to just refix multiple times on the way down to avoid abrasion rather than rely on rope protectors. But rope protectors are also a great way to handle significant abrasion risks.
Especially if they're up here beyond where you're going to be climbing and you don't care about removing it later.
If the route's wandering, you still just use protection points to redirect on the way down. And then as you climb up, you remove the protection points, and you do have little mini pendulum risks along the way.
But you'd have that climbing with a partner.
That's the same as climbing with a partner. Welcome to Index. We are going to show you how to top rope solo, starting at a bomber 2-bolt anchor, going down, setting up to come back up, top rope soloing. And if you wonder how we got up here, I either walked on this ledge over to this 2-bolt anchor and built my anchor. I climbed with my buddy belaying, went in direct and pulled up the rope to the middle or to a tail to fix, or I might have lead rope soloed up to this anchor to set it on my own, no one around. If you want to know how to do that, you'll have to watch our next video. So with my rope fixed, it is touching the ground, and I also have a knot in the tail. In this scenario, I have 2 strands fixed. May or may not want 2 strands when you come up, but either way, you're fixing from the anchor to the ground with knots in your tail. And I'm gonna zip down on a single rope wrapping device. But before I do that, I loosen my PAS, and you always wait one system before you take off the previous. So I'm on my rappel device before I take off my PAS.
And do you prefer to have just, if you did a 2-rope system, to have 1 8, or to do what we did here and have 2 8s?
This is some filming rigging. I personally see no abrasion risk in this scenario on this route. The knots aren't gonna wear. I'm only gonna come back up once. There's not that much bouncing. So I would build a single master point, a locker of your choice, triple locking, double carabiners, 2 quick draws, your comfort level, and fix the rope and go down.
I just happen to be using this one to shoot him doing this.
This rope, once it's redirected below, is gonna have a wear point on this edge. So once I'm below this edge, I am going to refix the rope to isolate the bounce to only below the point where it's refixed. And I'm just gonna do that on a cam. It's not a 1 cam anchor. All the weight is on the cam, but it's backed up with 12 inches of slack. It's totally fine. And I'm gonna choose to do that refixing point somewhere comfortable on the way back up, right at this finishing jug after this horribly thin finger crack. And I'm gonna put a great cam in somewhere. Clip my adjustable PAS into the cam anywhere. It's not a 1 cam anchor. I'm staying on my rappel device. I'm just giving a little slack above my rappel device. I'm just gonna go into the thumb loop for convenience sake. I make sure I'm within arm's reach. I slowly weight that piece. I give a bit of slack. And I'm going to refix the rope to this carabiner so that above any edges are loose, even.
And it's not seesawing as you're climbing.
Exactly. If I'm projecting this horribly thin finger crack, every time I fall, it's stretching the rope and sawing, but it's no longer weighting that edge, but it's still redundant. So this could look like an alpine butterfly. It's a great option. But I'm not gonna send my project here. I'm gonna have to come up. As I come up, stop below the knot, go into the piece with my PAS, undo the knot, zip the rope through my device, it'll automatically fall through, weight that rope, undo my PAS, pull the piece out, resume climbing. A little trick that I recently learned is to do a slip knot for a one-handed release. Advanced technique here. So we showed how to do that. You do a full twist, pass the upper bite through, cinch the upper bite, and that's what I'm gonna do right now. So you do need to, again, always weight your next device before undoing your previous. Horrible habit for me to pop up and undo the PAS if I haven't already weighted my rappel device.
Now, I see this as a risk, and this is a static rope. And so if this was a butterfly and you didn't want to deal with it and you have a ledge you can grab and an easy lie back, you'd be tempted to just keep climbing, stand on the ledge and clean it up. And then you are now looking at a fall factor 1 potentially. Is if your devices hit a knot, it's bad practice to pop the cam out and keep climbing and let a droop above you build up. That is the scenario where desheathing comes into play. If we never allow slack to build up between us on the pulleys and the most recent fixed point, desheathing is not an issue. So the advantage is I'm on the jug using my pulleys, not the pinch. I can, with some effort, pop this one-handed, let it fall through. My pulleys, not the pinch on hill, auto feeds, clean my cam, and I keep climbing. Everything we're talking about is super safe enough until you get about right here and you get excited and you go to top out and you're in a hurry and now you have a belly in the rope. And if you're level with the anchor and you fall, you are falling the same amount of distance as you have rope in the system, and that's called a fall factor 1. A real no-no is if you are above it and then you're falling twice as far as you have rope in the system. Factor 2. So just take that very serious when you get to the anchor, that you're keeping yourself tight the whole time and that you don't have this going on. Now you might have that going on and not even realize it. Let's talk about how to tie the slip knot so it doesn't come undone on you when you don't want it to. Now, if this rope is the part that's fixed going up to my anchor, this is my tail. And I could tie all sorts of fancy extra knots, lots of knots, lots of extra safety. The problem is when you untie it, or if it becomes undone, you now have a lot of rope in the system, and you don't want a lot of rope because then you have essentially the belly that I keep warning you about, and you would fall and go whack. But you don't want to tie the slip knot so simple that it goes through like this and you cinch it up like this. And technically, that is a slip knot. But the problem is that slip knot slips. That's roughly what I weigh. So the better way is to put not just one twist in it, but 2 on the side that you'll be pulling. And then you take the top here and you just have just enough slack that you can get it cinched up on here. Now, this is the super good enough way, but if you don't have it dressed tightly and it's a little bit loose, and even if you have a long enough tail in here, this could collapse and come undone. That's what you call a slip knot. Now, what if I dress the knot? I do the 1 twist, 2 twist, you stick the bite in there, and you pull that to get that to look right, so it's dressed right, and then you pull this tight, so it's up against the carabiner tight. Now let's see how strong that is if it's not going to collapse. So at 5.81 it collapsed, and then it took 8 kilonewtons for it to basically break. Now here is something I thought was interesting about this knot when I put this loop in here, and if you pull this strand, if you take the strand out and you put your fingers where the strand was, what does that remind you of? Does that look like a munter? Now let's say I take my bite and stick it back into this hashtag not a munter, and I put that in there and I have a bunch of extra tail. I wonder if trying to get all fancy and doing macrame is going to keep that from collapsing. I don't know. I don't necessarily have to pull test this to find out. Will that be able to slip through? Yep, and if it does, yep, it looks like it all comes through. And now you have this much more extra tails. I don't think doing some extra macrame stuff here is going to be any more beneficial than if you just dress your knot and get it as tight up against that carabiner as possible, which I think I just lost the ability to do because I try to get too fancy. Now, please holistically understand what we're testing here. This is an 8.9 millimeter dynamic rope. Your results will vary if you use a 10 millimeter static rope. It might be harder to undo itself. If you use something skinnier for whatever reason, you're top roping, soloing on that, then it might come undone sooner. But then if it's dynamic, you might be okay if you have enough rope in the system. Just remember that the exact same thing that you could be doing, which is tying a knot here, falling on it, pulling it out, and slipping at the worst possible time, might be totally fine. Oh, it's just like I know I'm on teeth, and it's just like... If you're 50 feet down on a dynamic rope and you fall 3 feet on a micro traction, it probably, maybe, might be okay. However, if you are just 6 feet from the anchor and you do this and you screw up and you drop 3 feet on a static rope, especially a hyperstatic rope, and if you don't know the difference, be extra careful, please, then that's where the danger is. and you haven't changed anything. You've been doing this all the way up the route. Please understand where the risks are in this because it's relatively safe if you do.
My go-to devices are really two progress capturing pulleys. So this could be a micro traction, it could be a spock. And I use two of these. They have toothed cams that catch the rope and then pinch the rope with camming action. But they feed really, really well, so you can climb with minimal resistance while heading up. People's concerns about these devices generally fall into the fact that they're toothed and might damage the rope or sever the rope, or that there's ways to hold the micro traction open, for example, and then it becomes a pulley and does no rope grabbing.
Okay, let's start with the first one. Is the first one a valid concern?
So the thing about these toothed devices is that there's actually a camming element happening as well. The teeth help engage the cam as the frictional surface for the cam to engage, and then much of the holding power is done by the pinching action. It's not literally just teeth shearing your rope, trying to hold you in place. There is camming action pinching the rope.
Isn't that true with all teeth? Like even this is
exactly
camming it. It's just smashing it against that. Yeah.
Which I think is a misconception of why people are afraid of teeth. It's not just clawing the rope and pulling down. There's still a force multiplier of pinching happening, and the teeth are what engage the pinching.
Now, if there was only a place that would test all these different ropes with tooth devices, so you know exactly how strong they are. A rope is getting desheathed between 4.5 or 6.5 N, depending how thick it is and depending on the teeth or whatever. How much force do you think we're getting on a system like this?
We're getting really minor forces. These devices are held up and you're falling inches.
2, 1. Yeah! Oh! I felt like 2 meters and 13 inches. Whoa!
The more legitimate fear about these two devices is that they are pulleys and they're designed to be modular and become a pulley with no rope grabbing. And that is bad. And that's when you disengage the teeth and it becomes a pulley and it does not do its job at all.
What would cause that?
The micro traction has a way to hold the cam open. It's highly unlikely for that to happen while you're climbing, but it very much could happen where you rack the device like this without remembering it, and then you go to top rope solo and you are
you lean back and it's not good. Oh my God.
Yeah. The Spock also has a feature to hold the cam open and become a pulley, but they use a simple piece of cord to do it that you pull and cinch, and I have cut the cord out. It feeds super well with the bearing inside the pulley, but you can remove the pulley disengagement feature so that it always grabs. Besides literally disengaging the teeth with the built-in feature, you can accidentally disengage the teeth by having loose clothing, hair, cord, suck into the pulley and cover the teeth and make the cam slippery, and it'll slide right down the rope. And that's the main reason we're using two devices. Demonstrating a loose piece of fabric or webbing getting sucked into the pulley and blocking the teeth. With the side plates open, we can see how something can get stuck between the cam and the rope. And then the device does not grab the rope anymore. And you go down to a backup knot or to the ground.
That's some serious gear fear right there.
Or you have two redundant devices and the other device catches you. And that's what we're going for.
Okay.
So I said backup knots. And that's a way to add a third redundancy.
Two devices. Slamming into a backup knot 20 feet down doesn't sound ideal.
Yeah, if you're using a static rope.
Oh God. Why wonder something if you have a drop tower? So we're gonna measure the peak force. Our person is on a micro traction that is locked open with something stuck in the teeth, so it slides freely all the way down to a knot that we have about 15 feet down there. 3, 2, 1. Oh my God, it caught. Much worse than I was expecting. Holy cow. You don't want your micro traction all of a sudden engaging. Wow, that's terrible. 4.85 kilonewtons. About what it desheaths at because it's an 8.9 millimeter rope. If you have a 9.8 millimeter rope, it probably would have been more like 5.5 kilonewtons. But that is a risk, not hitting the backup knot and your teeth engaging while you're falling. It wouldn't be an episode without a Z2 in it. I just installed this backwards this time and taped it open, so if it falls quickly, the teeth won't engage it. 2, 1. Did it work?
Totally hit the ground. Micro traction is still intact. Yeah, I think your knot was too low.
Science is hard. Now, I don't really like that number. That's pretty high. This nut seems pretty jammed up, but it did its job, sort of. Let's try the static rope now and see if we can get a high enough force to destroy the micro traction. What happened?
That was actually wild.
3, 2, 1. We just exploded the micro traction, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Oh my God, that is gold. Well, that force explains why that happened. I'm thinking about changing the slogan to creating gear fear. The rules are simple. Have no slack and have a backup device, because a backup knot may or may not back you up. So these are tooth devices with pulleys. Can you use an ascender?
You can use other tooth devices that can ascend the rope and grab if you were to fall, if you were to weight it. But they don't have pulleys. They don't feed quite as well while you're climbing.
And do you clip the top hole?
You clip the top hole because it's getting drug upwards, but it still weights.
And the one without the handle, the curl?
Yeah, I don't usually use an ascender like this because I like the smooth feeding, focusing on the climbing. But you certainly can in a pinch, or if you just don't have all the gear for big wall climbing and multi-pitch climbing.
Now, a nano traction does not have this feature. So is a nano traction a good option?
A nano traction would be a great option if it were a little bigger. It's a little bit too nano. What happens is the space between the carabiner and the pulley is so small that it doesn't feed as well. So we get down to the nuances of trying to find the optimal device for feeding and grabbing reliably. An adjacent category of devices are camming devices that are ribbed instead of toothed.
Ribbed for your safety. I think a lot of people think that because there's no teeth, that it doesn't desheath the rope. So let's test this ropeman 4 and see what happens. Pinching is pinching, I guess. What I'm not fun about, besides the fact this desheaths ropes like everything else seems to, this is, I don't know, problematic, because that lip right there is what keeps these two plates from coming apart. And it just seems like it can open too much to where there's only that little tip right there that's keeping it together. And it's not uncommon for me to look down and see that it's off by that much. It's not a bad device, it just isn't mitigating the risks people may think it does. And before you ask about the ropeman 1, that is lower than any other device I've tested this with. Now, to compare apples to apples, let's test a micro traction with teeth on this specific rope to see what happens. Oh wow, it's actually a lot better.
We're generally not in the range of forces where we're even risking desheathing the rope. So I'm gonna opt for something that feeds really well, and the toothed devices feed better than the ribbed devices.
What about a T-block? It doesn't have a pulley for being smooth, but if this is all you have or you want to be lightweight, is that an option?
What I don't like about the T-block is that the force magnification is not relying on a cam, it's relying on a ramped surface of the carabiner sliding down. So it's just less reliable. It's like comparing a cam to a ball nut.
I have this on my harness. Can I use it?
A big fat protraction could also work, but we don't want to clip into this hole, or you could potentially open the device. And if you clip into this hole, it doesn't feed so well.
Okay, sold. Not that one.
You can literally gut check in your basement, in a shop, how well is the device going to feed up the rope, and then play with all the different failure mechanisms to understand the trade-off of feeding well and grabbing all the time.
Now, how well do all these devices feed? I'm going to try to demonstrate this to you using my super scientific instrument here called a luggage scale. Now, if I try to pull up this micro traction with nothing on the end of my rope, it requires more to pull it up than there is weight underneath. And that is going to introduce the slack that we don't want to have. Now, we can take a little bit of weight on the bottom, and how much weight is really the question. This is 2 pounds, and when it clings against the wall, it is not loud, like a rack of cams or a metal water bottle, for everybody to know that you're top rope soloing at the crag. And I lift it up, and I am at 0.8 pounds. So the spock is the same thing. It is a pulley and teeth, and when I pull it up, I get between 0.7 and 0.8. So the ropeman 1 is just the ribs pushing up against the carabiner, and so it's going to have the most friction out of all these devices so far at 5.7? But wait, there's more. This is rated for a 10 to 13 millimeter rope, so we were out of spec. What happens if you use an 11.4 millimeter rope?
Almost 5.
That's pretty bad. Now, the Ropeman 4 is a little bit better. 5 pounds too, if you put it on backwards. Now, this doesn't spin and the ribs are just being pushed up against it, but it does feed a little bit better. And at 1.3 pounds is about 50% more than the micro traction. However, if I have less efficient devices like the Ropeman 1 and the Ropeman 4, I'm literally lifting up my shoes, and then you're potentially going to be falling on slack. Well, I could just clip more weight underneath. Well, technically you could, and then it would work. Now, how much weight do you need if you don't have something hanging from it? Very interesting that even with just micro tractions, you need almost 60 feet of this 8.5 millimeter opera rope before it'll self-feed with nothing at the bottom. If you use a thicker rope like a 10.0 semi-static rope, you need about 48 or 50 feet. That's quite a bit that you need before it just self-feeds and you're not manually pulling as you're climbing. Now, there's two things you need to consider while you have the weight, is you're not always climbing straight up. And if you go off to the side, this is a lot of drag with a bungee cord around your neck that you're going to be managing. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel it not just 1 or 2 pounds more with an inefficient system. You're going to feel it a lot more. And the other issue is if you pull out these slip knots we talk about in this video, or you are wandering, now your shoes are on the ground or whatever, you're hanging there. And now you don't have any weight underneath and you continue to climb and it starts to do this again. Now, I almost forgot to see how efficient an ascender was. And it's about 1.08 pounds. Not too bad, actually. One device that we haven't talked about yet is the CT roll and lock, and it is a kind of a hybrid between a ribbed device and a pulley device. Now, one concern is if it were to somehow automatically open, which I don't know how it would do that, the more likely scenario is that you opened it before you got started and you did not gut check it and you left it open. And if you forgot to close it and lay back on it, you would die. But let's say you're responsible and you close it and you check it. How much does it take to lift it up? 0.94 seems to be the peak force on that. Now, this is almost as efficient as a micro traction, and I believe there might be a new model out or coming out that has less of a risk of this coming open automatically, but there's still the risk of you accidentally leaving it open. So there's no carabiner in the way to get something caught in there. So if you slide that up over the item and it gets stuck inside of there. Oh yeah.
It's highly unlikely, but it has happened, and there are accident reports. But if you have 2 devices,
it's not an issue.
Almost impossible for 2 devices to jam at the same time.
So when does it desheath a rope? Oh, that's actually not too bad. I'm impressed that was higher than a micro traction, but what's funny is it still desheaths.
The elephant in the room is we haven't talked about the lift, which has its own cult following of a reasonable top rope soloing device that gives you redundancy in type of catch. So a lot of people use the lift and a micro traction paired together for redundancy. Now, it is a different type of catch, but how does it desheath the rope? Oh, sick. Yeah, it's all breaking around the same range. Focus on your transitions so that you're never creating forces in the range of desheathing the rope. You would literally have to climb past your anchor and fall to be in that category. The lift must go on in a very specific orientation, which is this guy, not this guy, this guy. It's a similar camming action. It looks like a lever. The rope can feed up, but if you try to go backwards, the whole device pivots.
Because you're pulling on the outside here.
And cams.
Okay.
People like the idea that there's no scary teeth involved. I do know that it does not feed very well. So you have to have a lot of rope weight, or you have to add weight to the bottom of the rope to get it to feed. And you do feel that weight while you're climbing. So that's personally why I don't use it.
So the drag required to pull this up is about 1.7 pounds.
So let's see what failure modes it has. The first failure mode of these style devices is that the weight must be induced out here on the carabiner. If you were to snag on something and weight it, you can slide it down the rope.
Is if this fails and smashes into that one. Tell me about that. Man, I'm really selling these things.
Pretty clear that the lift is not a redundant device if it's below anything else.
If this gets pushed in, which, yeah, it seems weird that I'm pushing my finger in, but if something grabs it or you like panic, this pulley is what's doing it. And this is like legit. Wow. Is that what people are always arguing on forums about?
If you're going to use the lift, it's pretty clear that you'd want it to be above any other devices. If the lift is below, it's not actually a backup, is what we clearly just saw.
Now, the entire operation of the lift is dependent out here, and it's not going to open up by just doing this, but if you just grab the device, you can slide it down. So if you're not pulling out here and you grab, it can come down. Now, that can be a nice thing if you want to not undo anything and pull it down a little bit to redo a section or something. That's fine. Just know the pros and cons about that.
If you have two pulleys and the top one fails, it's not pretty, but you can see we're not disengaging the teeth. So then it's a question of what is this metal on metal strength? And what do you think? It sure looks super good enough to me. You're still weighting the top pulley in this backup scenario, but it's being blocked on the backside by this cam. That looks redundant to me.
I'd be fine with that. Let's find out how bad that is. Yeah, it desheaths it like everything else. So that grabbed the rope like it was supposed to, and these were smashed up against each other, and they look super good enough.
So on the way up, if you have two devices, you definitely want to keep them apart by holding the top device up, because if you're pulling up with the bottom device, you could somehow open the top cam with the bottom device. But that's an easy fix by simply holding the top device upwards with some sort of bungee lanyard.
And how would people do that?
You can tie a loop of elastic cord, or you can buy the Avant bungee lanyard for supreme comfort and adjustability in holding up that device.
Okay. Big bungee over here.
Big bungee over here. So the spocks don't play super well together if you have a spock on the top because the cam sticks out so far.
Wow.
It'll snag in the other hole and it'll cause things to bind and not auto feed upwards. It doesn't disengage it, but it does cause poor feeding. So a nice redundant and high performance system would be two progress capturing pulleys. Here we have a micro traction and a spock. I do like that the spock has a cutout cord, so this cam cannot be held open. That's a nice backup. Both on anti-cross-loading carabiners, and then a crucial step, as we saw, is to hold up the top device with some sort of lanyard or bungee cord so that it auto feeds and these keep separate. So you're only holding the top one up, the bottom one can trail. As we just saw how devices interact and fail, a lot of people will yard up a route and cinch like this. And you can see that the top cam is held in a disengaged position, so we're not redundant when we do that. This bottom device, if it were to slip, you would count on them separating during free fall and hoping this device engages. So that's not a great practice. If you're going to do that, I would cinch from the middle, and then you're fine.
So I've used a sling and a hair tie before, but I couldn't stand up all the way. And so is this a choking hazard?
If you were to fall and invert, it's not a choking hazard. It's got stretch, and then it's got a fail-safe where it will blow apart.
That was a concern when I used a sling around my neck, is I had to put it under my arm in order to feel like it wasn't going to choke me out. So how tight do you like to have this?
The lanyard is really doing the work of keeping the top device up so the devices don't touch. And I personally stand up tall and adjust it to be snug but not tight, and then I'll start climbing. If you're doing slabby terrain, you might need it tighter or looser, overhangs. It's perhaps better to start a little over tight when you start climbing, because while you're climbing, you can add a little bit of room, but it takes two hands to tighten it. You really want to make sure your PPE devices are connected.
Wait, that's a bad idea.
So this is a bad idea. We connect our PPE devices, we gut check our PPE devices, and then we clip our lanyard to hold the device upwards. Some people will separate the devices further, which I think the real benefit would be easier cinching.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is this will auto feed down there, this device were to fail and hold open, you're still going to go all the way down and catch in the exact same way that we were catching before. The only benefit really is that room to cinch. If your team camp lift, you can still use a bungee that goes through the carabiner hole, clips back to itself, no modifications needed, to hold the devices up for good auto feeding. And you have the spock below for a backup. If the lift were to fail, they jam together, you're still redundant. And in this case, you actually can...
That sits pretty nicely.
Cinch between, and because the lever is hidden by the housing, this is redundant still, even though I cinched from below. So they do play nicer together if you are cinching up from below. But again, that's a bit of a technique consideration, because if you are using 2 pulleys, you could just cinch here.
But you can't cinch there if you have a camp lift. No. That's not what it's designed for.
No, that looks weird. I don't want to cinch there. If your team lift, you are cinching a little different than if your team double pulleys. I'm personally team 2 pulleys. Seems super good enough to me, either way.
Now we're going to get to watch Brent top rope solo a 513D, which I don't think I will ever be able to do. But I do think that I will be able to answer every question that anyone's ever asked about the gear they trust with their life. Because we now found a sustainable way of doing it by having a store. And people who choose to buy from the store help make this possible. But the store also allows me to touch all the gear, which allows us to play with it and have it available for this video. And I don't care what you buy. I don't care if you buy this. If you want to buy gear though, please buy it from hownottoo.com. It also allows me access to brands that I would not otherwise have. And this video is being made with one of those brands, Avant. And I also get to see what gear you guys are buying and what questions you have, which is how I'm going to be able to answer those questions. And we put out a lot of content that we try to make sure is as helpful as possible. And we try to consolidate that every Saturday into a newsletter. And we spend hours making it as fun to read and as consolidated as we can. That way you don't miss anything. Now, I'm not looking for sympathy purchases. I want to have the best selection and the best prices and have all the niche stuff. And I take shipping reliably so serious that if we don't put it in the mail the day you order it by 1 p.m. Pacific time or cutoff time, your order is free. We want to be the best climbing store we can for you. And we're always looking for feedback on how we can make that better for you guys, including how to make these videos more helpful. Now let's go watch Brent crush.
I have just rappelled down on my fixed strand, and I refixed multiple times. I isolated any abrasion risk. There's a little bit of bounce because it's a long pitch, but I feel good about the abrasion. So my top rope solo kit, I have my 2 progress capturing devices, a spock and a micro traxion for my preference. Got my neck lanyard to hold the device upward on top. I've got my single strand rappel device. I've got an ascender, which is helpful for transitioning downward if you decide to go down in the middle, or it's helpful for making a little bit of progress if you can't do some free climbing. Good to have as part of your kit. And then I just have some cams for the route, because the whole idea is I'm practice climbing and I might want to know where the protection goes for a future lead. For my setup, it auto feeds pretty well with maybe a pound or 2 on the bottom of the rope. So I just use some of the tail, not all of the tail, unless I'm out of tail, but a few loops of rope in a bundle is what I personally do.
So that's all the weight you need to make that heavy enough to go through?
Usually works. If it doesn't go through for the first few feet, you might pitch through slack between the devices, but it'll auto feed within 10 feet. With a lift or other devices that don't run as smooth, you either need more weight, which you do feel as you're climbing upwards. I put my top device on, feed my lanyard loop through, clip it back to itself. It's nice to check that. And again, if you're leaving an anchor with a rope above you on a multi-pitch, you always check your devices before you undo your tether. I check my top device, I add my bottom device, I push down. Both devices are engaged. As we talked about, you can disengage these and they become a pulley. And you can find that out really quickly.
Very quickly.
It's not catchy. We like catchy devices around here. So this is enough weight for these 2 devices to feed, most likely. You could also put a water bottle, you could put shoes, you could put a backpack. You do start feeling it if it gets heavy, it starts banging against the wall. Don't use wind chimes. If you use a metal water bottle, it's literally a freaking wind chime, and people do that.
I want to capture this auto-feeding magic. Jesus says you have a slide.
Not auto-feeding. Now it's auto-feeding.
There, now it's auto-feeding.
That's the hole that fell off of in the other video that we may or may not have made yet.
You make top rope soloing look fun.
It's so fun. I do it all the time.
Oh yeah, that auto-feeds really well.
If you sit back, the devices don't even go down, the carabiners don't even have to pivot. Just a little bit of rope stretch. And it's hard. Getting hard already.
You know, if you're sending it, it's not showing how good the system catches you.
It's not the hard part yet.
Shit.
That's the idea. You can fall whenever you want.
So this is how you can really project something.
Yeah, it can be like, where do my hands go? Where do my feet go? Where's the gear? Going up. These devices, even with the lift, all the devices we showed, it's hard to go down. There's the Taz Love, which is an industrial device we didn't talk about. Allows you to maybe go up and down, but until there's a climbing version that's affordable and a reasonable size, I'm personally not using it.
I can see why you want to not have your rope rub over the edge.
Bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. Finger cracks. So fun. There you go. Kind of cheat a little.
I mean, that's the point, right?
Come on, I finger lock. Ouch. Tricky spot here. Good thing I get to try it over and over. Fuck. I'm gonna cheat up a tiny bit. Easiest way to do that. There's 6 inches. To stand up tall. Yeah. So that's probably not crazy once you know the hands and feet, which is why I'm up here alone to take forever and figure it out just right. Slippy.
Is that the other way?
Yeah, it's the other way.
So if I'm working the crux of my hard finger crack project and I just went up through the hardest 10 feet and I want to go down and rehearse it once more before climbing off the route, this is where an ascender comes in really handy. I'm going to do this to safely switch to my rappel devices. So I weight the ascender with my PAS, but I keep the pulleys on for a moment. I might be quadruply redundant for a moment.
You're quadundant.
Quadundant. But you gotta put them all on, you gotta take them all off. You might as well do it in the safest order if they're not getting in the way. Now I'm back to redundant, but I don't wanna just pop this. I want to cinch up a little bit, slack my PAS. Now I'm fully on my rappel device. And I pop down a little bit. And then if I were to, when I want to go back onto my progress capturing pulleys, I wrap on to my ascender with the PAS. I keep the device on. Go back to quadundant mode. Check progress capturing both devices. Tridundant for a moment. Tidy things up. Clip my neck lanyard on. And then I'm going to cheat up just a little bit, bicep pull up for this to go slack. Now I'm back in top rope solo up mode. That is a juck if I've ever seen one.
Well, if you come off of that, yeah, that'll feel like one.
Big hold.
That's a big hold?
Yeah. Juck. So then come up to a knot. I stop. Don't push the knot upwards.
You don't want to jam this right into your knot.
Nope. And it's not for getting it stuck. You don't want to do it because then you're causing a lead fall of sorts onto a static system.
There's zero rope in the system.
Zero rope in the system. It's increasing fall forces because I'm hard fixed right here.
Fall factor infinity. Divide by zero.
Yeah. But what it looks like to pass this knot, I have to stop climbing. I have to go in straight.
And this is what kept you from, because that's loose right there.
Yep. And then I'll undo this clove, not clove, undo this alpine butterfly.
Butterflies are easy to untie compared to some knots.
That's why I used the alpine butterfly, is I just fell on it 20 times in 20 minutes. But it's still reasonably easy to pop out. Reset, cinch up, or lower down, back onto these devices before I undo this.
And the single pop slip knot is if you're actually trying to send.
Exactly.
And you don't want to interrupt what you're doing.
Exactly. I would be fine with this if I'm working this hard route. I know if I get to this jug, the route is over. So I don't mind. I cheated maybe a move here, but I know if I'm here, I've rehearsed what I need to rehearse, so that would have been fine. I don't mind interrupting the flow of climbing to go in straight, take the weight off my hands and feet and not be sending. So that's okay, but we'll show, once again, a sneaky way to one-hand release your refix as you climb through without stopping your send. Top rope soloing is all about transitions, passing your fixed points, creating fixed points. Again, PAS is great for that. We already showed how to do the slip knot.
Have you found the slip knot to be very reliable?
I found it to be a bit reliable. That's maybe an advanced technique, and there's probably a better knot. I'm not a knot meister, I don't know.
You see the magic.
So if I'm sending up to my slip knot, and I didn't fall 20 times on it, I should be able to pop it.
Oh, that is pretty nice.
Let it zip through, and then keep my top rope
Yeah,
flow
keep it tight.
going. So if you're just doing fast mileage and not expecting to fall a bunch, the slip knots are great. You can refix multiple times on your way down. No rope protectors in your way, but on your way back up, it's just continuous climbing.
Sold.
For the price of one tug, you can keep climbing. And you do see boulderers top rope soloing with a GriGri all the time, and they're really just pulling slack through after a few
Now, why would anybody, especially boulders, want to use something that they can lower with, even though it's a little harder to feed? Because you're going to be pulling slack out. These do not feed well. Well, if you want to work on the same few meters, feet, I always feel weird saying feet. All right, there you go. If you want to work on the same few moves, then you're not going to want to transition over and over and over, because that is annoying. And the more you transition, in theory, the more risk there is. However, these don't feed very well.
So the GriGri, let's compare it for auto feeding and grabbiness. Auto feeding,
There is no auto feeding.
not so good. So you're literally yarding rope through, and you're adding risk of falling farther than just sitting back. Pretty grabby. If you have a bit of weight on the rope strand, it will grab. If you're close to the ground and there's no weight on the brake strand,
Oh my God.
not as grabby.
Brought to you by the Neox. Do you think that the Neox would auto feed?
The Neox will auto feed up.
An auto feed down.
Auto feed down.
Jesus.
I like my device to be grabby. With the Neox, you might be able to calibrate the weight on your brake strand hanging down with a rope coil, shoes, a bag, so that it does auto feed up and grabs on the way down. I'm not going to touch that now. This is a new device, and as of now, we're going to say that it's sketch.
Now with a pulley and teeth, it doesn't matter how much weight is on the rope. As long as you're not trying to go away from plumb, it's going to slide up the rope. However, with a GriGri, Neox, or Pinch, the way they operate is it has an S-bin in it. So if you only have a pound of shoes in this, it was going to work. However, if you just add this 5 pounds here, this is now going to be a lot harder to lift up. With just 5 pounds added to that, which could be the length of your rope after you get closer to the top, now you're looking at 6 pounds before it goes up. And this is the Neox, which feeds better than a GriGri. The higher you get up, now it's just a lot more work to do this all the way up. Now, my buddy Evan did some human testing to see if the Neox would catch. Well, I think it's because you have weight on the tail.
Yeah.
Which is what you need for it to feed. It works if you use it right.
Yeah. Best case scenario.
So we just talked about using 2 devices all the way up to this point, and then we just keep showing a single device and then it failing or not failing.
That's a fair point.
So how would I want, if I wanted 2 devices, sure, I could put blocker knots, but that's not redundancy. That's just keeping you from hitting the ground.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to stop in a position to tie the knots.
If we were to put a spock below the GriGri, what we're doing is inducing a bend on the brake strand. So this is going to be horrible to feed. It's going to be really hard to cinch. This is not a good setup.
Sure, so you can use 2 devices, but it just gets weird when you do it.
If you put the progress capturing pulley above the GriGri, same deal. You have the cam binding with the GriGri. The GriGri does an auto feed. This doesn't auto feed now that this one's not auto feeding.
Oh, you took all the weight off of this device. So you could gut check any system you have an idea about at home on the ground.
Yeah, this could feed, but it would take a lot of weight on the rope. And at that point, you feel the weight, and it's pulling you down off the rock.
How well does the Edelred Pinch work with this setup?
So the Pinch is pretty similar to the GriGri in poor auto feeding. Possible, but you'd be yarding rope through as you climbed. If your brake strand is light, you could go a ways before it engages. Yeah, simple. 12 devices later. So we've talked a lot about redundant devices, but we don't have a redundant rope, do we? I personally feel good about refixing enough along the way to isolate and know that I'm not going to have a total rope failure, which would be extreme, abrasion, core shot, and then core failure. But some people like to use 2 strands, and what that looks like is a knot in the middle of a rope, and you can have 2 strands So your two redundant devices could be on different strands. If you're going over an edge, you can still have sawing at the same time in the same place. So you still need to refix along the way.
And then you can have one device on each rope, which kind of negates one smashing into the other.
You're always going to be weighting one strand or the other. You're never going to be equalized anyways. So you'd always have a little bit of a stagger, and you'd be cinching and sitting on one rope at a time. But your devices aren't going to smash each other, and that's a legitimate improvement.
Does that mean you need two of these now? I mean, I'm asking Big Bungee here, so I feel like your answer is skewed.
Big Bungee's going to say you definitely need 2 lanyards. But realistically, you're only ever truly going to be weighting one. So you're going to be sitting on one, and the other is going to be trailing slightly below as the backup. So I still would use one lanyard and have one device up and one device down.
You just sold half the lanyards. If you don't trust one device, you can use them all. You try the lift, Climb Tech roll lock, another micro traction, or Wild Country ropeman 2, 1, or 4. Maybe not the 3. Comment below if you enjoyed that joke. Yep, I would deck if this did not auto-feed. This does look absolutely ridiculous.
It does.
It's the gear equivalent of, if you don't know knots, tie lots. We have a lead rope solo video coming out soon, and if it's already out, that will be in the description below. And Brent shares with us his way of doing it that allows him to efficiently climb hard stuff. If you want to thank Brent for helping us make these videos, you can buy Avant gear at hownottoo.com. Cheers. So you like top rope soloing?
Yeah.
Was this your first time doing it?
Yeah.
What do you like about it?
It's a much better belay than you.
I really liked it because I didn't have to belay you.
Yeah. Hanging out, I was taking a break, and then I was like, I'm ready to try again.
Yep, which is...
I made it further than I thought I was going to.
And I've been eating the whole time.
Yeah.
Like I normally do.
Sure, yeah, I think you actually still do that while you're belaying me.